Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Roundup. No special announcements or anything, so let's jump right in. First up, Humble Bazooka is now selling another color scheme variant of the EDFX 3D printed case, this one modeled after the Super Graphics. And to be honest, I wrote this post for two reasons. One, because I actually really love these cases, but also I just wanted another excuse to talk about the EDFX because I want to make sure people always keep this in their minds. This is a plug-and-play device that works with any TurboGrafx or PC Engine console that has the pins in the back. So none of the Duos, but basically almost every other one. And you get really, really high quality audio and video out of a Genesis 2 mini DIN. So you get composite and RGB out of it. But this also works with the Turbo EverDrive Pro's CD-ROM emulation to get you stereo audio from the CDs as well. Whereas if you just plugged this in with any standard adapter, you could still get CD audio. It would just be in mono due to how the TurboGrafx and PC Engines work. I put that through pretty deep dive testing last year, I think, year before, whenever it came out, and I just found it to be really awesome. So if you were going to get an EDFX, it comes with an acrylic case that's totally fine, but I strongly recommend buying one of these with it and buying a case to match whatever console you're going to plug it into, because it just looks really cool. There's proper strain relief on it. There's the feet built into the case, and it's just a really awesome aesthetic upgrade to something that already works so well. So I love that Crix made it with a generic case so it just fits everything, but I also love that Humble Bazooka stepped up and made it so you could personalize it for your console. And links to absolutely everything are right here. 3D printed case, the EDFX, the Turbo EverDrive Pro, Genesis 2 cables, and you could actually get everything right from Stone Age Gamer as well, so you could save on shipping and all that stuff. So links to everything in the post, and if you were looking for a really good composite and RGB plug-and-play solution for any of those consoles, definitely read up on this one. Next up, Rich Whitehouse just released the iOS version of the Big Pimu Atari Jaguar emulator for $10 on the App Store, and it is just as full-featured as the PC version. You could load scripts, you could render games in the native resolution of whatever the iOS device is on, and as long as it's a newer iPhone or iPad, it'll run just as good as the PC version. Obviously not on the iPhone 1, but whatever. I have social media posts and a YouTube short showing checkered flag running, and much like the live stream I did last week, it's actually playable and rendered at a higher resolution at a higher frame rate. So this is just really the perfect example of how software emulation can do things that FPGA hardware emulation either would have a much harder time doing or just wouldn't be able to do at all, which is one of the many reasons why I love software emulation. Also, if you want to learn how to add ROMs to your iOS device, just follow the step-by-step guide I posted here. Obviously, you have to find the ROMs yourself, and nobody condones piracy, but if you want to just download them and extract them right to your device, I have the step-by-step guide right here, and I found it to be very, very easy. I may have allegedly just found a full Jaguar ROM set floating around somewhere and just extracted it right to my phone, and I thought it just worked as seamless as you could imagine. Also, last week I mentioned the latest version of the Big Pimu PC version that was beta for Patreon subscribers. That's out of beta and it's just up for public release. So anybody that saw the stream last week, which is also in this post, if you want to check it out and see this thing in action, just go to the website and download it. Of course, if you want to support Rich, either consider buying the app or supporting on Patreon. But if you're not in a position to, or if you just want to try out the emulator real quick and it's not really your thing, it's up there for free. Do whatever you'd like with it. And if you want to just see what it's like, check out that stream. And if you want to hear more from Rich, check out the interview we did a while back where he's got a pretty cool story to tell and it's just always a fun person to hang out with. So thanks to Rich for doing this. It is very, very weird and cool that I get to just pull out my phone and play Atari Jaguar games, some of them better than original hardware. So if you're a fan, definitely check this out. Steve from RetroTech just posted a video that he shot back at Retro World Expo of a 1991 Buick Reatta that had a touchscreen CRT built into the dashboard that wasn't just for entertainment. It even did the climate control and a bunch of other stuff. And I was creepily hanging out of the background while this video was being shot and was blown away at how cool this thing was. And while, of course, the cheapest tablet on the market could do the same, if not better today, You have to really put it into the context of 1991. I was 10 years old, and stuff like this just, you didn't see it, especially didn't see it just sitting in a car somewhere other than Knight Rider, obviously. But, this is basically any little kid who grew up on Knight Rider's dream to have this. So it was very, very awesome to see it. If you're a car nerd and a CRT nerd, this is a must watch video for you. But I just thought it was really neat, and I absolutely wanted to share it with people. So I asked Steve to write the post because, while this stuff doesn't get everybody excited, I think a lot of us nerds are going to want to watch it and just see what it was like. But very cool to see older technology that didn't really take off, but totally could have. Next up, I want to talk about some of the single flash carts from the company Inside Gadgets. The one that I wrote up here, because I think it either went on sale or is newish, is for the Pokemon Mini, but essentially Inside Gadgets makes a bunch of different single flash ROM carts for consoles like the Game Boy, Game Gear, Atari 2600, Mega Duck, Supervision, and the Pokemon Mini. And if you were looking for stuff on a budget to flash one ROM at a time, it might actually be cheaper to pick up a couple of these than to try to get a more traditional ROM cart, which are available for most of those other handhelds or consoles, including the Pokemon Mini. You could pick up the Ditto Mini for just over $100, I think. But there's a few things that are unique about this. First, you could buy a $30 programmer for this particular Pokemon Mini one, or you could also buy a $10 Edge adapter, which allows you to use their GB cart programmer. And that's where things get kind of interesting, and that's where I need to explain a little bit about these single flash carts. So they all have one side that plugs into whatever the handheld or console is, but the other side is usually the same as a Game Boy cartridge. Or in the case of the Pokemon Mini, you could get the $10 Edge adapter that essentially turns the other side into that. And then you buy their other programmer for the Game Boy and use their Windows-only software to use that to program all of these things. So it doesn't matter if you're not even using one of the Game Boy versions, you just buy that programmer, and that's why the other Edge connector is on there, so that you could just plug that in and use those to program with. So when I first saw this, I was kind of wondering who this would be for. And of course, it could just be somebody on a budget who wants to pick up a couple of single flash carts and a single programmer and be able to just load one game at a time. But it also might be a pretty easy way for people who are making their own ROMs or making their own homebrew to put a ROM on a piece of hardware in order to sell their game. So if you have some fun, unique homebrew and you don't think you're going to sell hundreds of them, then maybe picking this up, as well as printing a 3D printed case, or depending on which one you're using, maybe even getting just a generic case for them and putting them in with a nice label. You could do that on a much smaller budget and less hassle than just trying to go through a manufacturing house for one of these things. So I just wanted to talk about this, both because I'm pretty sure the Pokemon Mini one went on sale, but also because this might be something that a lot of people listening could take advantage of. I don't think this is for everybody. I don't think it's as widespread as just a generic, or not a generic, but like a standard, what you would expect out of a ROM cart. But it's something that was worth talking about. So hopefully at least a handful of people listening were interested. The company 8BitDo announced a few things this week. First, there is a Black Friday sale on a lot of their different products. I linked directly to the sale products here in the post, so if you were looking to pick up any of their controllers or keyboards or anything like that, maybe now's the time to pick one up. But also, they announced a Bluetooth receiver for original Sega Saturn consoles. Unfortunately, they're claiming it's virtually lag-free without posting any technical info whatsoever, which is meaningless to me. It could mean anything, but they're $25, which is a pretty good price. If you're willing to spend an extra 10, you could get the one that's based off of Blue Retro that we know exactly how much latency it has because a bunch of people in the community have personally tested it, and it's the same as all Blue Retro. Very fast, as low as half a frame of lag in all the right environments. Obviously, if you're in the middle of a big city and you have your microwave going and a bunch of 2.4 gig devices all at the same time, it's going to be a different reading than if you're in the middle of nowhere. But it's my very strong opinion that when you're talking specs on stuff like this, talk about best case scenario that's repeatable, and then let everybody else just deal with their own personal environments. All nerds should know that wireless could potentially never work the same way twice. So, that's just something we should all be aware of. But if you want something that's been tried and tested, get the Blue Retro one. If you want to give this one a try, or maybe you want to lag test it yourself, grab the 8-bit DOE one. Also, they opened pre-orders on a Saturn-themed version of their mechanical keyboard that's also wired or wireless, the same one that I've been talking about for over a year, but not the one with the built-in keypad, the older style that doesn't have the number pad in it over on the right side. But the Saturn theme is pretty cool. They have some buttons that's in the Saturn font. They have like an S Saturn logo on there. So if you were looking for one of these mechanical keyboards and you're a huge fan of the Saturn, you could consider it, but it's also $110, which is $10 more than all the other editions, but also $30 more than the other editions are now with that Black Friday sale. So you'd have to be a really big fan of the Saturn and not want the built-in number pad to pick that one up. But whenever I talk about 8-bit DOE, I sound so negative, but I really do like their products. Their marketing is exactly what you'd expect from the same marketing as analog, which is always maddening. And sometimes they kind of miss the mark. So most of the time, I think they make pretty cool products and all for very good prices. But I'll let you make your decision on this one, and hopefully somebody will step up and lag test this Bluetooth receiver just to see what it could do, and hopefully get some real lag test numbers on this thing. But if you're like me and you have trust issues with tech from the years of being let down by false marketing statements like virtually lag free, go with the other one that I linked to and kind of just go from there. But for the most part, I actually think all this stuff is cool, and I am really looking forward to getting my mechanical keyboard and seeing if I like it or not, because I've been using that chiclet style keyboard for a very long time, but we'll see. Links to everything are in the description. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the RetroTime plug-and-play adapter for front-loading NESs, and Tito from Macho Nacho Productions recently did a video on it that I wanted to showcase here. If you were wondering exactly how this thing performed and what to expect, please watch that video. And I'll give the short version because I don't want to just repeat what I said last time and, redo what Tito already did. But it's essentially an adapter that allows for Bluetooth controllers as well as wired controllers, Famicom expansion port, and Famicom expansion audio, all to your front-loading NES. And it's mostly a no-cut mod. And that's something I wanted to talk about again because when I talked about it last time, I said how there's a pop-out cover on the bottom of NESs that's, you don't cut it, you just pop out the cover, and then covering the expansion port connector itself is a piece of plastic where you just cut some very thin tabs. And when I talked about that, a bunch of people chimed in and said that they bought their NES new and it never had that. It did have the expansion port connector, it did have the plastic pop-out cover, but it didn't have the little cover that you had to cut the plastic. And I guess that kind of makes sense because when you do injection molding for plastic, it only can be used a finite amount of times before it starts to degrade, and then you need to have another tool made, another metal processing tool. So I guess Nintendo, after a while, must have just been like, why are we doing a pop-out cover and a snip-off cover? If we're going to use the stupid expansion port, wouldn't we want to make it easier on people? So it would make sense that after a couple of runs, they just said, let's save the 1 penny per unit or something and make an easier tool without that cutoff piece. So everything I just said is total speculation, by the way, but I do want to know your opinions on this and to hear, do you remember buying an NES? And when you popped off the plastic cover on the bottom, did you have a plastic thing covering the expansion port that you had to snip off, or was yours just bare like it probably should have been? But just something that, a weird NES trivia that I'd love to know the real answer to if anybody out there happens to know it. But either way, check out Tito's video on the RetroTime adapter because it looks like a really awesome upgrade for your front-loading NES. Marco Retro just posted an update to his video about Extron DVS 605 devices for use with downscaling. And essentially, this video is how to flash those devices with custom profiles that make downscaling better or work at all depending on the scenario. And I thought this was a really handy thing because you could use this with a lot of different Extron devices. And while the DVS 605 is very good, it's not the best downscaler out there, and it's certainly not something you should go bend over backwards to try to find. But if you already have one or you could get one really cheap, being able to actually flash custom stuff to it really expands what you could do with it and makes the capabilities a lot better. So if you're a fan of downscaling at all, even if you don't care about this particular device, I think it would be really worth it to just check out the video and kind of skim the post, because I guarantee if you're into downscaling, at some point you're going to run into, well, what if I just grab an Extron device for this, and or one of your friends might, whatever. And it's kind of good information to know. And also just kind of learning how to use any of these flashing tools for Extron stuff is pretty handy as well, because their older equipment can be very, very handy for us. I'm not 100% sure what the legal ramifications are talking about using their flashing software, but here's my guess. Remember, I'm not a lawyer, by the way, but I do have quite a lot of experience with this stuff. My guess is that if you figured out a way to flash these devices without their software and you sold it to companies who had their products, you'd get sued. But if you're just doing it for a used device that you bought off of eBay or found somewhere that for your own personal use, I can't ever imagine a scenario of Extron caring about that. And in fact, I would even argue that companies like that, kind of like with a lot of the scopes that we use, want you to do stuff like this so you get used to using Extron products. And the many of us nerds that also work in industries that use them are now probably going to continue to choose them because we're familiar with them because we're using their software. So that's my opinion. As always, feel free to tell me what you think about that stuff. But I can't imagine anybody at Extron ever getting pissed because you bought one of their 605s off of eBay, downloaded software, and flashed a downscaling profile to it without having an Extron account. So just my opinions on that. And also, I think it's hilarious that Marco, his thumbnail is him flashing the Extron scaler. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a child. I'm fine with that. But anyway, if you're a fan of downscaling, this is another must-watch video just for a lot of extra knowledge that you get for using these things. Next up, Reese just did an unboxing and demo of the new Atari 7800 Plus console, which is essentially the exact same guts as the HDMI outputting Atari 2600 Plus, but just in a 7800 shell, which I think is an awesome idea. Take a product that people like, that performs well enough, and just change the aesthetics for people that maybe want the nostalgia of the console they grew up with rather than a different one. So if you had a 7800 growing up instead of the 2600, this one's for you. And just a basic overview, this is a console that plays original 2600 and 7800 games that did perform pretty well, although I don't remember anybody doing any real solid lag test measurements with it. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I will make sure to correct it next week and maybe ask Reese to update the post just because of my own stupidity. But if not, it would be awesome if people did that. And if people aren't aware, maybe I should do a video just showing people how to use high-speed cameras or your cell phone or just basic cameras to try to do these tests to at least get it down within a frame. Because while I've heard that it performs pretty well, I would always love to know numbers, and I would always love to know if there's variable latency. Because there's some stuff like the Genesis Mini that's all over the place, but there's definitely other software emulators that run at a pretty fixed amount. And if you're talking 2 or 3 frames of fixed latency that don't vary, you could probably have a pretty good experience with that with most games on most TVs, assuming you put your TV in game mode, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're interested in what this console looks like, definitely check this out. I think MVG did a video on it as well if you want multiple opinions. But generally, both of these things seem like great choices for people that just want cheap relative to other options, cheap and easy ways to just play your 2600 and 7800 consoles or cartridges on a flat panel TV with HDMI output. Obviously, when you start talking about $130, you're starting to creep into Mr. territory where you can get it 0 latency and very quality accuracy, but you can't play original cartridges. It doesn't look like the originals. So they're really kind of apples and oranges when it comes to the total experience. But if you want more details, please check out Reese's post and video. At the time of recording this, pre-orders for complete kits of the Mr. Pi are still open. The Mr. Pi is that absolutely horribly named DE10 Nano clone from Taki Udon that has nothing to do with Raspberry Pis whatsoever. It is just the clone of the DE10 Nano. However, the device itself, all of those pre-orders are sold out, but the kits are still open for pre-order, once again, at the time of recording this. So you can get it fully enclosed in a case, or you could get it just with the I/O board, and the prices are $180 or $155 respectively. And it's important to note that even the $180 version is still much cheaper than just the DE10 Nano itself if you're going to get the official one. Ken tested this a while back, just last week before, whatever it was, and found that for a mystery user point of view, it performs absolutely perfectly as long as you don't use a USB PD power supply. So this is a really great option if you're willing to wait till about January, late January, early February for delivery. Let's just call it February because we all know what happens at the end of the year with shipments. Or if you don't, trust me, it's always a nightmare for people making products. Everybody, now this isn't a Taki thing. Anybody who makes products, January and February are like the worst months to get them produced. So there could be some delays, but you could try to wait for the QM Tech ones to go on sale and grab them before they sell out. You could, of course, just pay extra for an official DE10, or you could roll the dice on this one and get it for a lot cheaper. The only thing that I still haven't seen, or if I have, I don't remember, my apologies, are a deep dive test on the analog video output of this board as opposed to some of the other makers' boards of them, because that's something that I would really like to see, because the past couple of revisions of boards from sellers like Retro Castle and Mr. Add-ons have been top tier with the analog video output, and analog video is really hard to get right. It's just one of those things where every time you think you know enough, you learn that you don't know anything at all. Most of us, at least. The deeper you go, the more you realize that, wow, there's a lot more to this. So hopefully that performs really well. I can't say for sure without testing one myself, but basically, if you were looking for a cheap way to get into FPGA emulation with the Mr. project, and you don't mind waiting a couple months, this is a very low cost way of jumping in. And it's totally safe to use. And if you're doing HDMI output, there's really no reason to even worry about it. Just pick one up. So links to everything are in the description, including the videos from Ken that dig into both this as well as the QM Tech version of it. Well, that's it for this week. It's still probably going to take me to the end of the year to catch up with all of the stuff I've been falling behind on, but I've really made the best effort possible to get any time-sensitive stuff out there. And I know I've missed a bunch, but I'm doing my best, and I think I've got the important and kind of the more niche ones out there so that, if you're just following friends on social media, maybe you would have missed some of the weirder ones. So I'm trying to focus on that stuff, but I'm doing my best. Hopefully by the end of the year, everything will be caught up. And same with Lou as well. Lou last week announced that the Mr. updates are going to be a bit sporadic, probably through the end of the year. So hopefully we'll all be caught up and back to normal soon. But as always, thank you to everyone who watches, listens, plays nicely in the comments, and especially thank you to anybody who supports in any way possible, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week. This week's Roundup is brought to you by Neo Paradigm Entertainment, connecting Southeast Asian influencers with opportunities in the West.